Now, Democrats like Joe Manchin, Joe Biden, and others keep saying that Republicans will come around to compromise. The fever will break. The fever will break. As long as we reach out to our Republican friends across the aisle, we can get some stuff done. We can get the important things done. We can move this country forward. Because Republicans care about governance too. How's that working out? Apparently, not well. Now, Joe Manchin. So I've talked a lot about Joe Manchin, and he doesn't want to do anything without Republican support. He's like, bipartisanship. We got to be bipartisan about everything. We got to have Republicans across the aisle. I'm not going to get rid of the filibuster. I'm not going to do anything like that because we can get Republican votes. I have faith in my friends across the aisle that I can reach out and I can get Republicans to support these things. And so what he's been doing is he actually has been working on a compromise to Senate Bill 1. So this is the Senate portion of the For the People Act. So you've got a compromise. And how does Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate Minority Leader, feel about this? He ain't interested. In fact, here's what McConnell has actually said about this. He said, 100% of my focus is standing up to this administration. What we have in the United States Senate is total unity from Suzanne Collins to Ted Cruz in opposition to what the new Biden administration is trying to do to this country. He also said, Senate Democrats seem to have reached a so-called compromise election takeover among themselves. In reality, the plan endorsed by Stacey Abrams is no compromise. So now Manchin's proposed compromise includes banning partisan gerrymandering, requiring voter ID, having at least 15 consecutive days of early voting, and making Election Day a public holiday, among other things. So now Stacey Abrams, a voting rights advocate, says, yes, I would support that plan. All right. Now McConnell says, no, and here's why. He says, it still subverts the First Amendment to supercharge cancel culture and the left's name and shame campaign model. It takes redistricting away from state legislatures and hands it over to computers. Computers. Which would arguably probably do a better job than what we have now. He continues by saying, and it still retains S1's rotten core, an assault on the fundamental idea that the states, not the federal government, should decide how to run their own elections. That's rich. It's super rich coming from a party that has also argued that the states are not allowed to change the date of their elections or to allow extensions and mail-in ballots and things during a pandemic. But they're all for the states running their own elections. I mean, as long as they don't make it easier to vote. Because if you try to make it easier to vote, we're not in favor of that. No. Again, we know Republicans don't want more people to vote. They've admitted it. They've said it before, all the way back in the 80s with Paul Weyrich and the so-called moral majority, talking about the Goo syndrome, about how, they don't want good government. Oh, no, they want less people voting. They don't want less people vote, or they want less people voting. They don't want more people voting. And especially they don't want black people voting. Now, what's interesting is that when it comes to voting, this is actually the Senate Bill 1 is actually pretty popular with the voters. Weird, I know, right? Who knew that a pro-democracy bill would be popular? Weird. Very strange. So, as Axios explains, the Democrat bill, which enjoys support from voters on both left and right, would also require dark money groups to disclose their donors and would remove partisan lawmakers on the left and right from gerrymandering congressional districts. So you've got some transparency there. At least you can tell who's buying off your politicians. So now Joe Manchin, as well as Mitch McConnell, Republicans, and corporate Democrats, by the way, are not in favor of this transparency. They're also not in favor of limiting the role of money in politics. Although, again, voters on both sides of the aisle, they both are like, yeah, of course we don't want big corporations or unions or billionaires to buy off our politicians. We don't want that. We hate that. We don't want the corruption in our system. We want to get it out. And this, yes, wouldn't get rid of the corruption, but it would at least shine a little bit more of a light on it. And so, unfortunately, that is a bridge too far for people like Mitch McConnell, who said, or at least according to the article, says McConnell feels both of these things would mean Republicans would lose power because so many districts have been drawn by the GOP to ensure that they stay in power. But interestingly enough, Democrats also gerrymander. Maybe not quite to the most, ridiculous districts that Republicans tend to draw, but you have Democrats and Republicans sometimes getting together, conspiring to draw their own districts in a way that keeps them both safe. They'll sometimes even do trading, where they'll say, okay, well, I get this district and you get that district, and then we're both safe and we both remain in power, and this is good for both of us. So now I believe that no one should be allowed to do that. I think that no one should be allowed to have a safe district. I think safe districts shouldn't exist. I think people should be able to pick their representatives. I do not believe that our representatives should be able to pick their own voters. This is so deeply corrupt and problematic, and not even anywhere close to what democracy is supposed to be like. Which, again, believe it or not, Republican voters, a lot of them, at least theoretically, say that they support democracy. And in fact, again, when you present a neutral, description of this piece of legislation, are generally in support of it. And I'll get into that in a minute. Okay. But again, Republican politicians and a lot of the establishment, they don't like having their corruption exposed. They rely on this corruption. They rely on the system staying the way that it is to stay in power, and they, of course, know it. And now there's a leaked conference call with right-wing groups and a McConnell policy advisor that revealed that Republicans know that they're losing the popular message when it comes to restricting voting. In private, they concede their own polling shows that no message they can devise effectively counters the argument that billionaires should be prevented from buying elections. This came from a New Yorker report back in May. When presented with a very neutral description of the bill, people were generally supportive, according to the pollster, adding that the most worrisome part is that conservatives were actually as supportive as the general public was when they read the neutral description. Now, this is according to Kyle McKenzie, a research director for a Koch-funded group, Stand Together. So this is, of course, very troubling for them. They don't like democracy. They don't like voters being able to not choose, to have a choice. They like to control the elections. They like to make sure that there are safe districts and that they continue to be funded by billionaires. And that's what it is. That's why, no matter what you do, Mitch McConnell will never support Senate Bill 1. You think he gives a damn about what his voters want? Hell no. Hell no. That's why no compromise will ever be good enough for Mitch McConnell. Not only does Mitch McConnell not believe in democracy, but again, he wants to do everything he can to block Biden's agenda so that later on, when the midterms come, he can say, oh, look, Joe Biden hasn't done anything, not even any of the modest reforms, or what he'll call extremist reforms. And so, he doesn't have a mandate. And so you need to put us back into power so that we can actually move our country forward in a bipartisan way. Sure. So now, why does Joe Manchin not understand that? Why is he bending over backwards to help Republicans? Well, I mean, I think it's because he is a Republican, basically. And the reason I say that is because I believe he thinks that they are partly correct in their worldview. That's why he is seeking bipartisanship with a political party that is extremely to the right, that are extremists. He thinks, though, that Republicans are correct enough that their ideas deserve a seat at the table. And look, if their ideas were good, then yeah, sure, they deserve a seat at the table. But they're not. They're anti-democratic with a small d. Add on to the fact that the party attempted to overturn the election and is now doing everything they can to block anything and everything. They're bad faith actors. Good bills, mediocre bills, doesn't matter. Anything that makes Biden look remotely good, they're going to kill for their own power. And the filibuster that Joe Manchin, and by the way, Joe Manchin has been exposed to have been receiving Koch support, Koch money, is in favor of keeping the filibuster, preserving it. And so not only is he monetarily benefiting from this obstruction, and there were, of course, recently recordings by The Intercept of him during meetings and doing fundraising as well from conservative groups and trying to hammer out this bipartisanship. But it just basically shows that he approves of the obstruction. He approves of what the Republicans are doing. And he generally thinks, I like Republicans. I agree. I want to stop the far left. You want to stop the far left. And of course, the far left in this case is just people who want more voting, more democracy, and less corruption. So there it is. That's why Joe Manchin needs to be defunded and replaced as soon as possible. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.